Welcome back, fellow nostalgia seekers. This is Howling Through Neo Tokyo, where we hold on for dear life as master mangaka Katsuhiro Otomo takes us on a wild ride through the perilous streets of a city where psychokinetic wonders wait around every corner. Last time, we watched as the hunt for Akira reached a fever pitch. The fractured segments of the resistance clashed with the rebel faction of the military led by Colonel Shikishima. Firefights broke out in the streets as the rebel military faction continued to exert their overwhelming advantage in both man and firepower. On top of that, Colonel Shikishima let the Espers into the fray. When Takashi, aka Number 26, came up against Lady Miyako's disciple, the immensity of his power was on full display. The fledgling telekinetic disciple of Miyako stood no chance against him. As the sun rose, everyone's disparate paths converged near the 12th District waterway. In a last-ditch effort to prevent Akira from falling into the military's clutches, the resistance former leader Nizu attempted to assassinate him. However, Nizu's shot hit the wrong target, instead taking out Takashi. The shock of Takashi's death awakened Akira's powers, bringing with them a wave of chaos and destruction on par with the explosion that destroyed Tokyo 3 decades prior. While the remaining Espers were able to save many lives, Kaneda was absorbed into the blast, disintegrating right in front of Kei's eyes. As the dust settled, we saw Tetsuo return to the scene. In the power vacuum caused by the catastrophe, he created a cult following in the name of Akira. Their ragtag forces patrol the streets, not letting any outsiders into their territory without first vowing fealty to the Great Lord. That didn't stop an American soldier named Lieutenant Yamada from infiltrating the area in disguise, however. Meanwhile, Kei did her best to nurse the 2 surviving Espers. However, as their health continued to decline, they requested to be brought back to the mysterious Number 19, a hitherto unmentioned result of the military's Akira project. I am so excited for this one, guys. This episode has a lot of lore about the Akira project and the players involved. This is the stuff that the anime cut for time, and don't get me wrong, the movie slaps, but I live for this type of stuff. So this is really what brought me to the manga in the first place. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. I'm Boy Meets TV, and tonight I'll be your guide through Neo Tokyo's tangled web of dark secrets and psychokinetic wonders. Chapter 18, Amid the Ruins. As the chapter opens, we see Kei re-entering the abandoned mall her and Chiyoko have been using as a hideout. As they discuss the status of the sickly Espers, Chiyoko bathes in the water fountain. We learn that Kei's managed to stabilize the Espers, but that their condition is rapidly deteriorating. Kei's convinced that Number 19 is the only way to save their lives. Hesitant, Chiyoko tries to talk Kei out of embarking into Lady Miyako's territory. However, Kei's resolve remains steadfast. They head deeper into the abandoned structure until they come on a locked door. As Chiyoko works on the lock, Kei's startled by an unexpected noise. It turns out, it's just a drunk and beleaguered Ryu, who kicked a bottle by accident. Chiyoko chides him for his inebriated stupor, but Kei's faith in him remains unfaltering. She requests updates on their friends, believing Ryu's been out looking for them. However, it appears the only thing he's been looking for is the bottom of a bottle. While this is happening, Chiyoko enters the locked room. Turns out, it's a makeshift armory. She assesses her inventory before picking out an absolute behemoth, which, this whole scene is so on brand for her. In an attempt to decide which weapon best suits Kei, Chiyoko heads back outside to ask. To her shock, she witnesses Ryu pull Kei in for a kiss. Surprise briefly overtakes Kei's face before Chiyoko rips her away by the wrist. Ryu protests briefly, but he quickly yields under Chiyoko's scolding. Dragging Kei behind her, Chiyoko leaves the area as fast as she can. She doesn't immediately acknowledge what just happened until Kei cries out that she loves Ryu. At that point, Chiyoko stops dead in her tracks. She spins on her heel and smacks the younger woman. She calls her a fool for wasting her pity on Ryu. It's clear that, since the blast, Ryu has become a husk of the man he once was. Elsewhere, we catch up with Lieutenant Yamada and one of his men. Yamada informs his subordinate that they are off to find the great Akira. At that very moment, a gunshot rings out. Our focus shifts to a nearby man in a yellow shirt and a red hat. He runs with a gun in hand, clearly terrified of whoever chases him. When he comes to a fissure in the pavement, he falls in. This lapse in judgment was enough to seal his fate. When he looks up, he sees an eerie-looking man in a red Great Tokyo Empire headband. He's a member of the cult of Akira. The cultist accuses the man in the yellow shirt of being a spy. When Tetsuo's aide arrives, he praises the cultist for capturing the spy alive. Gleefully, he announces that they will publicly execute the man. Residents of the cult, posing as a makeshift nation, swarm the area, not wanting to miss the event. Tetsuo's aide addresses them like a ring announcer. He goes on about the youth of their fledgling nation, about its perceived vulnerability, and why that means that they must protect their land from any outside interference. Catching this spy established the perfect stage to demonstrate the special capabilities of the elite members of the army of Akira. The cultist who caught the spy puts on a white headband and pops one of the special capsules as the speech continues. Veins and sinew bulge from his flesh when the pill's effects take hold. The crowd is startled by the transformation. The cultist then steps forth, hands held out towards the cowering accused. Blood pours from his nose as he strains, but psychokinetic power follows, causing the spy to scream in agony as the pressure builds in his head, eventually causing it to burst. The crowd watches in wonder, amazed at the display of fantastic powers. Lieutenant Yamada is among the amazed onlookers, and he's only witnessed a fraction of the power he's about to contend with. Reverent cries to Lord Akira ring out as we zoom out to see the ruins of the city from on high. Elsewhere, Chiyoko and Kei pick their way through the rubble. On their way, they encounter a beat-down caretaker bot, tagged with graffiti. The tag says, "Hail to the Great Tokyo Empire," signaling to Kei that the army of Akira have been through the area recently. A series of wide shots really demonstrate the shift in the landscape that Akira's outbursts wrought as the duo make their way into the encampment. As they make their way through the rows of makeshift shelters, Miyako's temple becomes visible on the horizon. The duo look up at its imposing image over the burned-out streets as they talk. Worried, Chiyoko points out how hard it will be to find number 19 amongst such a large crowd of people. However, Kei doesn't think that number 19 is among the sick and injured outside. She has a feeling that 19 is inside the temple. Chiyoko is absolutely mortified by the idea of entering, but Kei's dead set. They file in with the throngs of sick and injured as they flood into Miyako's temple. Once inside, Chiyoko and Kei break off from the crowd and take cover behind a pair of pillars. Once the coast is clear, Kei begins leading the way. She says she doesn't know why exactly, but she has a feeling of exactly where to go. It's similar to when the Espers took control of her in the military's secret medical facility. Convinced she's right, Kei leads the way. Back in Akira's territory, we catch up with Lieutenant Yamada. He and his man are rattled by the telekinetic execution they just witnessed. Perched high up in the distance, a figure looms over them. The man known as Seer uses his telekinetic powers to serve as a lookout for Akira's cult. He telekinetically calls out a description of Yamada and his location. Frightened by the display, Yamada flees down an alley, eager to escape. However, at the end of the alleyway, a figure blocks their path. It's Tetsuo's aide, and he's not alone. Although they're ready to fight, Yamada and his man are caught off guard when the cultist executioner from earlier blasts through a window in front of them. The aide requests Yamada and his man be taken alive for public execution, eager to put on another demonstration of the Empire's might. Yamada isn't ready to go down without a fight, though. He attacks head-on. The cultist grabs him by the neck, but Yamada breaks his grip before countering with a left. The punch lands flush on the cultist's nose, forcing him to fall to a knee. Behind him, Tetsuo's aide eggs him on. This prompts the cultist to launch a counterattack. He lands an elbow on Yamada's chin, sending him flying backwards. That's when the other American soldier steps in. He charges the cultist, swinging a wild punch at him. The cultist grabs the punch effortlessly, however. He then seizes a soldier by the throat, pulling him in until they're forehead to forehead. Veins pop on the cultist's forehead as he uses his telekinetic powers to blow the soldier's brains out. Blood splatters everywhere as the American's lifeless body falls to the floor. This second show of telekinetic force seems to have been too much, however, causing the special drug's powers to wear off. Seeing his opening, Yamada strikes. He catches the cultist with a left cross that knocks him to the ground, where he lands in a pile of broken glass. Yamada channels his inner Cactus Jack and slams the cultist's face down into the shards of glass. When the cultist lifts his head up, Yamada then embeds the jagged fragments of glass even deeper into his face with a roundhouse kick. The cultist flies backwards, bouncing off the building before collapsing face first in a bloody heap. Just then, one of Sear's announcements rings out. Due to his telekinetic power, he's already aware of the death of the cultist. He puts out a call to capture Yamada, who he labels a spy and an enemy of Akira. In the vicinity, we see Ryu, now sober, looking out at Yamada from the distance as he makes a break for it. When we catch up with Kei, we see that she and Chiyoko have made it all the way to the dais in Lady Miyako's temple. As she steps up onto it, a voice announces that they've been awaiting her arrival. It's Lady Miyako. When Kei turns to see her, she's stunned to realize that she's the mysterious number 19 Kyoko sent her after. Not entirely convinced of Miyako's identity, Kei demands proof. Miyako holds up her hand, on which the number 19 is tattooed. Along with this, Miyako admits that she came from the military's secret lab over 30 years ago. Without prompting, she offers Kei a bag of medication that she says will help the Espers. Lady Miyako also mentions that she spent time with them, but at some point, the Espers came to be locked away. She tells Kei there will be a time for answers later, before sending her off to bring the medicine to the ailing Espers. Although, as Kei makes her way out of the facility, Miyako all but admits that she's in a race to consolidate forces before Akira's power awakens once again. Back in Cult of Akira territory, Yamada continues his frenzied flight. When someone calls out to him from the distance, he pulls his weapon in fear. But it turns out to be Ryu. Ryu offers the American his assistance. When Yamada doesn't immediately trust him, he offers something more valuable: information. Once Yamada relents, Ryu shows him into a hidden tunnel system. Sear informs his cohort about the development, noting that there is a limit to the range of his power, and that the two have passed out of it. He also notes Yamada's skepticism of Ryu. In the heart of Akira territory, cultists carry Akira on a makeshift palanquin. Tetsuo stands atop a stage, riling the hordes up with rhetoric of Akira's infinite mercy for distributing food to the needy. Cries of adulation ring out from the crowd. However, the reader gets to witness that Tetsuo's secretly lacing the food with special drugs before he distributes it. A girl from the crowd in tattered rags catches the aide's eye as she receives her food. She admits the food's for her injured father, but the aide isn't concerned with her answer. He insists that the girl come with him because pretty girls can get better food by serving Master Tetsuo. For fans of the anime, this is our first introduction to Kaori, who serves a notably different role, which is evident by her coming into the picture so late, but in a couple other ways as well, as we'll see. When our attention returns to Kei and Chiyoko, we see as they pass through the rubble of a bombed-out building. As they pass, Chiyoko senses someone watching from the distance. The two women draw their weapons and take up a defensive stance. Chiyoko fruitlessly scans the area. Unable to find the source, she chalks up the misunderstanding to nerves. However, the reader sees that someone is stealthily observing from the building nearby. As the sun sets, our attention returns to the Cult of Akira's hideout. This is a pretty dark moment where we see that Tetsuo has been using his position in the cult to fulfill his twisted desires. Before leaving, he tasks the aide with retrieving women. Tentatively, the aide tells him he fell short of his quota, but that he brought 3 women. As Tetsuo walks inside, the aide pleads with him to be gentle and to leave the girls alive, cluing the reader into not just the depravity of Tetsuo, but the remorseless, senseless violence he continues to wrought since being endowed with his powers. The following scene is pretty dark and explicit, so even though my goal is to show every panel, this portion will have to be heavily censored. Thankfully, we're not losing anything significant, but in the future, maybe this will have to be a Patreon thing or something where I can put an uncensored version behind a paywall, because I definitely can't show this on YouTube, and that's with me playing pretty fast and loose with the rules as is. As the concubines, Kaori included, cower in front of him, Tetsuo goads them into taking the special drugs. We see 2 of them take the pills, but Kaori, notably, does not. This is also the first time we see Tetsuo's left arm since being attacked by Soul's laser cannon. We see that he has a mechanical arm in its place now. We get a brief glimpse of Chiyoko and Kei being followed back to their hideout before we switch back to Tetsuo, where we get absorbed into a series of psychedelic vignettes brought on by his telekinetic powers. We see him and Kaneda speeding on their bikes. Kaneda goads him, saying if he can't keep up, Tetsuo should get off the road. Flashback to the present, and we see the bitterness Tetsuo has retained over Kaneda always showing him up. In his mind, he should have been the leader, not Kaneda. We then jump into another memory, where we see a sobbing child. It turns out it's Tetsuo. We see that he's being taken away from his home and being put into the correctional school. A place where, as we know, the stated mission of improving the life of wayward youths runs counter to the brutal reality. Then we see a slightly older version of Tetsuo. He's battered already and scared of an impending beating. However, Kaneda steps in, standing up for him. In the present, we can see that Tetsuo's overwhelmed by the barrage of memories, as he enters a specific one about someone stealing a locket with a picture of someone he calls his mother. In the next panel, the sobbing child version of Tetsuo is flying through space when a voice comes in. It calls him a liar, saying it wasn't actually a picture of his mother, just something he found in the street. The young Tetsuo transforms into the adult one, as he asks the disembodied voice how it saw through his lie. As he floats in front of the moon, he demands to know who the voice belongs to. We then see the ghostly apparition of Kaneda appear not only to Tetsuo, but also to Kei. In the distance, we can see the ripple effects of the power Tetsuo is outputting, as the Colonel and Lady Miyako can both sense it. As Tetsuo floats in the sea of pills, he tries to convince himself that what he's seeing is just an illusion. In the final panel, however, we see a version of Kaneda that hints at the fact that that might not be the case. He calls Tetsuo out, saying he did a good job crafting himself a kingdom made out of garbage. The smirk on Kaneda's face says that telekinetic powers be damned. He still sees Tetsuo as the crying kid he used to stick up for in grade school, and nothing more. Chapter 19, To Save the Children. Tetsuo screams Kaneda's name as he snaps out of the vision. A dream. He tries to convince himself that it's all a dream, but he's not even buying it himself. As he scans the room, he sees that 2 women from the night before died, but Kaori remains alive. She's cowered in a corner as he approaches. Meekly, she admits that she didn't take the pill. In an attempt to save her sick father, she risks trying to smuggle it out instead. She expects Tetsuo to be upset, but he just smiles. He tells her to wait there as he exits the room. Outside, Akira looks out on the moonlit water as he uses his power to swirl rocks around in a double helix formation. Tetsuo accuses the boy of hallucinating the hallucinations he experienced. He reckons that since their powers respond with each other, they could have accidentally synchronized. He wonders what made it happen then, of all times. That's when the child acknowledges Tetsuo's presence for the first time. As Tetsuo looks into his eyes, he's overcome with terror. He screams out as he's transported from where he stands into his bedroom, where he flops onto the bed. As he sits there, he cowers, trying to come to terms with what he saw when he looked into Akira's mind. Meanwhile, Akira just casually continues juggling the rubble from his perch. Elsewhere, Ryu and Lieutenant Yamada sit in a bombed-out apartment. As they eat the canned food Ryu found there, he explains that the lady who lived there was hoarding, but the neurosis was so strong she's starved rather than open a single can. Yamada asks if there's a moral to the story, which Ryu humorously says there isn't. Yamada then updates Ryu on some of the happenings from the outside world. Apparently, the Soviets took control of northern Japan in the chaos. They've been able to appoint a provincial government as well. America, on the other hand, has maintained its distance, even though they have a fleet in the region. Their fear of Akira is too great to act, Yamada says. Yamada goes on to inform Ryu that America had previously gained intelligence on the Akira project. But they didn't take it seriously until they saw what happened to Neo Tokyo. Now they're terrified. Upset, Ryu accuses the world of abandoning his home. Yamada doesn't deny it. The truth is, their only concern is Akira. Following this, Ryu and Yamada clash heads a bit, as Ryu attempts to gain Yamada's trust, but they leave the area together nonetheless. At the Cult of Akira's hideout, a group of cultists dispose of the bodies of Tetsuo's concubines. Horrified by what he's seen, the aide thinks Tetsuo's lost his mind. While the group is moving a body down the steps, the cultist who spied on Kei and Chiyoko returns. Along with their location, he relays their possession of the Espers, who he only sees as weird kids. That's enough to get the aide's attention, however. The aide orders him to keep track of them. Wisely, he knows that if they are the Espers, they'll need to call in the big guns in order to get them. In Tetsuo's room, Kaori sits sullenly, watching him. His stupor hasn't lifted since his encounter with Akira. Shock and horror mingle in his expression. Back at Kei and Chiyoko's hideout, we see that they're privy to the cultist spy watching them. Chiyoko suggests fighting their way out, but Kei dismisses the notion as too risky. Instead, they opt to stealthily flee to Lady Miyako's temple. As they descend the steps, Chiyoko senses something peculiar. The sensation influences her to decide that they should leave immediately, despite Kei's concern that Ryu wouldn't be able to find them if they did. Distracted by the discussion, they let their guards down long enough for the cultists to sneak up on them. A ragged band of men surround them, admitting that Akira has sent them to retrieve the gifted children. Rather than plead for her well-being, Kei's instinct pushes her to plead that they not upset the Espers by bringing them to Akira. Chiyoko grabs her attention by handing her one of the rockets and telling her to prepare to fight. One of the cultists tries to intimidate them, but Chiyoko dispatches him with a single blow from a rocket. She sparks a fuse on the explosive and drops it, prompting Kei to flee the impending explosion alongside her. They vacate the area just as the explosion rings out. When they enter the foyer, they see that a large group of cultists have secured the Espers. Chiyoko charges in, taking out cultist after cultist. In response, the cultists redouble their efforts to abscond with the children. Swarms of them grab onto Chiyoko and Kei, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. It looks like they're on the verge of being overcome when Chiyoko lights off another rocket. She puts it right into the belly of a cultist, sending him flying in a plume of fire and smoke. She then sprints forward, shoulder-checking one man. She kicks another in the face. Another she grabs by the back of the neck and tosses him aside. She tosses away another one, and after that, she secures Masaru in her arms. Even after fighting through all those men, there's yet more cultists. One of them trains a rifle on her, ordering her to freeze. Rather than concern for her own life, however, Chiyoko's far more concerned with the fact that the man pilfered one of her guns. She's able to use this fact to her advantage, though, by tricking the man into checking for his safety on the weapon. Distracted by his effort, Chiyoko is able to get the upper hand on him. She dispatches him easily with a backhand while simultaneously disarming him. Outside, she finally finds Kei, who's in the grasp of a cultist. Kei frees herself from his clutches, but she's instantly swarmed by several others. She runs, but they're able to grab her. They drag her into a dark room where a man holds a knife to her throat as others hold her in place. Again, this is pretty dark. Luckily, Chiyoko shows up just in time. She shoots down the door before unloading on the men, riddling them in a barrage of bullets. One of the men hid behind the door, however. He's able to catch Chiyoko by surprise, stabbing her in the ribs. Chiyoko's unfazed, slamming her gun butt into his nose, sending him to the floor. She doesn't hesitate to point the gun at him and finish the job too. Despite suffering a significant wound, Chiyoko insists she's okay. She entrusts Masaru's well-being to Kei before setting off on her own to retrieve Kyoko. As she dashes off, she promises Kei she'll meet her at Lady Miyako's temple with the girl in hand. Back in Cult of Akira territory, we see Ryu and Lieutenant Yamada observing the cultist gathering via binoculars. In the hideout, Kaori feeds Akira while the aide worries about Tetsuo's stupor. It's been too long since he's held an audience, and they risk a riot the longer they go. Tetsuo, however, seems to only respond to Kaori. When she brings food to his bedroom, he looks terrible, but says he has an idea. He tells Kaori his belief that Lady Miyako must know more about what's happening to him. He demands that Kaori help him up so he can go see her. In the detritus of the city, the cultists who kidnapped Kyoko attempt to flee with her in her cumbersome sleeping pod. One of them sees something on the horizon that startles him. He yells for everyone to run as one of Chiyoko's rockets whizzes by his ear. The rocket explodes nearby as the men begin to sprint. Chiyoko's hot on their heels though. As the cultists come to a makeshift bridge over a ditch, they think they're home free. However, Chiyoko has a different plan. She smashes in the face of one of the stragglers, leaving him little more than a lump in the dirt. She sprints forward, taking out the men carrying Kyoko one by one. She backhands one man, then throws a hook at another. A third pulls a knife, but it doesn't even matter. She takes the gun off her back and blasts his hand right off. After dispatching all the men, she puts her hand to the knife wound from earlier, lamenting that she's running out of time. She approaches Kyoko, lifting her from the bed. In the distance, Seer puts out a telekinetic warning about her, commanding all cultist foot soldiers to recover the child. We then catch up with Kei, who's carrying Masaru piggyback style through an alleyway. Fatigue has started to set in just as we see that she's being watched from the shadows. We then briefly cut back to Kaori and Tetsuo, as she injects him with a concoction of drugs to give him enough strength to get to Lady Miyako's temple. He rises from the table shakily and teleports away with hardly a word. As Kei continues on her own path towards Miyako's, we see that she's aware of the bandits tailing her. Based on their footsteps, she's able to assess that there's probably 5 to 7 of them, too many to fight, so she runs. At that point, the men make their presence known, letting off a few warning shots to try and stop her. Undeterred, she's able to round a corner and get out of sight. She hides just long enough to let the group past her, then flees in the opposite direction. However, they spot her as she runs, gun in hand, and Masaru notably absent. Some well-placed gunfire takes out several of the men. When one of them tries to flank her, she gets the upper hand easily. She pins him against the wall and puts the gun in his face. She demands to know who sent them. When she finds out they're just common thieves, a look of rage spreads across her face just as the chapter ends. Chapter 20, Revelations. The bandit pleads with Kei to spare his life as we open chapter 20. He runs the gamut of everything he can think to offer her, but he ends up saying the wrong thing. When he offers her sexual favors, she loses her cool, bashing his skull in with a rock off the ground. She proceeds to pick up Masaru from the hiding spot she stashed him in. She then attempts to sneak away undetected. However, one of the remaining bandits spots her from the roof of the nearby building. This prompts her to flat out sprint, hopeful to put any amount of distance between them and her. When the group filters into the alley behind her, it appears she might not make it. However, in the sunlight streaming through the end of the alley, a group of men clad in white robes await her. Not only that, these mysterious monks know her name. As the bandits descend on them, Kei turns to fire, but the robed monk advises against it. Incensed, Kei demands to know why, but when she turns back towards the bandits, they bow in fealty to the monk. Turning her attention back to the monk, Kei switches her curiosity towards his origin. He admits that Lady Miyako sent them. She awaits Kei's arrival. However, back at Lady Miyako's temple, we see that she's already got a visitor. Bedraggled in his red robe, Tetsuo walks through the halls of the temple. When he sees the corona-like sculpture behind her, he's taken aback by it. It's something he's seen before, but only in his visions. Lady Miyako admits that she saw it as well, when she was being experimented on in the military lab, although she did not see it as clearly as Tetsuo did. She goes on to explain the side effects she faced due to her exposure to the mysterious vision. Her growth was stunted and she lost her sight. However, she admits that she sees the world with more clarity than ever as a result. Tetsuo cuts in, saying he wants that power. He wants to know more about Akira. Interspersed with this lore, we see scenes of Chiyoko as she valiantly battles Tetsuo's forces. They pull out all the stops in their attempt to retrieve Kyoko, but Chiyoko still has some fight left in her. What's more, she may have some backup, as the colonel watches the skirmish from the distance. Alright, this next part, This is it. Miyako explains how, in the 1960s, a small group within the Ministry of Defense began a small project. So small, it didn't even receive a code name. At first, they simply collected and analyzed data. But by the 1970s, they began to use their findings. They gathered a group of individuals believed to have particular traits. The scientists experimented on these subjects. Eventually, these experiments drew the interest of a controversial scholar who specialized in the central nervous system. Although most dismissed his findings, his involvement in the project produced dramatic results. Miyako goes on to explain the methodology implemented by the scholar. Tubes more narrow than the smallest blood vessel were filled with salt water. Those tubes were then inserted into the nerve cells of subjects' brains. Electrical stimuli were then fed through the tubes repeatedly in specific patterns meant to create variations in their genetic composition. The children they administered this treatment to were given code names in the 20s. Miyako clarifies that all children in the program that achieved any level of telekinetic power received numeric designations. However, the children in the 20s were rare and special. They had achieved superior gifts after all. Then, her focus comes to Akira, the boy codenamed number 28. She explains how he destroyed Tokyo 3 decades prior. With it went all of the records of the project, as well as the scholars in charge. The only survivors were the Espers themselves. In fact, it took a full 3 years before anyone even realized that the explosion and the project were connected. It was only 5 years prior that the government authorized the project to be reopened. Although thorough, Tetsuo notes that something's missing from her explanation. Doesn't explain why Akira specifically got so powerful. This, however, isn't so easy to explain. I'm just gonna read Lady Miyako's speech bubbles verbatim from here. How do you explain your own powers? She asks. You can move things by the power of your mind and destroy with but a thought. If you chose, you could lay waste to all the energy mankind has amassed. Compared to the power of your will, the energy mankind has used to date is no more than puffs of air. Man is woefully short-sighted. He huddles upon the ground staring at his own feet. It is only when he is afraid that he considers the other world, and then he will gladly sell his soul to whatever God or Buddha offers him hope. In reality, we are all part of the flow of the same great stream. Even scientists don't grasp what their calculations truly show them. Infinity, time without limitation, space without bounds, energy beyond imagination. And what do they do with their findings? Announce them at society dinners in return for plaques and the recordings of their names in the annals of history? No more than that. But even so, the stream flows on before us. When a man tries to see into the distance, what does he do? He narrows his eyes. Even with your eyes opened as wide as they will go, you cannot perceive something so large that it is beyond the range of your vision. The universe flows toward the ultimate conclusion. What is higher becomes lower, density grows thin, order seeks entropy. The ultimate trend toward the uniformity of all things is inevitable and irreversible. Men gather together as though they would reverse the stream, but in truth, they are only driftwood. Yet, even as the stream sweeps them along, they possess one power capable of stopping the stream. When this power is used, the stream will stop for an instant, and then resume its course with redoubled intensity. When it is before them, people recognize the stream for what it is and fear its power, as you've already seen. Look beyond form and consider substance. Akira is not in the stream. When she finishes, Tetsuo merely lashes out at the abstractions placed before him, but Miyako doesn't relent. She just says that people in the stream will never understand. Tetsuo asks if she understands what's happening, but she insists that he's the only one who can find the answers. Afraid, Tetsuo admits he can't do it. One look inside Akira's mind almost tore his own apart. Lady Miyako laughs derisively in response. She taunts him, asking if he's scared. She goes on to tell him, although Akira's power is truly beyond measure, so is his own. This is where she drops the bombshell. She says that the drugs have not been helping Tetsuo's telekinetic development, but hindering it. While they do expedite the release of energy, they're a shortcut, which prevents true power from developing. She says that when Tetsuo overcomes his addiction, only then will the power flow freely through him. She challenges him to learn self-control if he truly wishes to gain power on par with Akira's. Back at the cult hideout, Kaori approaches Akira. The boy sits upright on the edge of his bed. He's emotionless, as always. She brings him a bowl of food and says she'll keep him company. We then catch up with Chiyoko, who continues to fight through fleets of cultists in her attempt to save Kyoko. As men swarm her, she uses up the last of her ammo. Sensing their opening, they circle her, ready to pounce. Despite the wound at her side, she refuses to give up. That's when the aide enters the area with one of the cult's telekinetically gifted foot soldiers. The aide gives the cultist a pill and tells him not to mess up. As the medicine kicks in, veins on the bespectacled man's neck and arm bulge. Rocks, small and large, lift off the ground all around Chiyoko. A massive boulder flies her way, but she's able to dodge it just in time. She jumps into a trench to escape. She then manages to break free of the swarm of men. She puts some distance between them on foot, but it's no use. She comes up to a massive fissure in the ground. It's a dead end. They're trapped. Chiyoko valiantly fights off the first wave of men that charge her, tossing several of them into the fissure. Even an axe-wielding cultist struggles to break her defenses, but this display only serves to enrage the telekinetic foot soldier. His emotions overwhelm him, blasting forth in a wave of telekinetic power that shatters the earth at Chiyoko's feet. The pavement caves in, sending her falling amongst a landslide. In the darkness at the bottom of the pit, we see that Chiyoko and Kyoko survived, their landing being broken by a pile of skeletons. When beams of light come in from the cultist search party above, she realizes she has no time to take in her surroundings. She must move. She begins to wade through the pile, which leads into a river of sludge and sewage. Undaunted, she wades through the muck with the superpowered girl in hand. She fights through swarms of vicious rats and is able to reach the other side, only to be greeted with the imposing figure of Colonel Shikishima. She takes a defensive stance over Kyoko, assuming the Colonel's presence means yet another fight. When the Colonel asks her destination, she refuses to answer, throwing her body protectively over the girls. The Colonel doesn't want to fight, though. He tells Chiyoko to follow him to safety. Seeing that the cultists are approaching, she follows. They climb out of the sewage together, and onto the rubble of a collapsed skyscraper. Back at Lady Miyako's temple, we see her sitting in meditation as Tetsuo considers a pill in his hand. As he does, he laments his fate. Then he teleports outside, where he sees the sun rising on the wreckage of the city. In the dim morning light, we see Kei and Miyoko's monks moving Masaru through the rubble to the temple. From the distance, someone observes that whatever the monks carry must be important, because they never leave the temple. Turns out, it's a member of the group that failed to secure Chiyoko. When he sees the monks have a kid in tow, he returns to his crew, who continue to search the sewage. When we catch up with the Colonel and Chiyoko, we see that she's begun to succumb to her wounds. She collapses on the roof of a building, nearly falling to her death. Back at the Cult of Akira hideout, Tetsuo watches Kaori and Akira sleep before teleporting outside. He sits in the stone throne as he dumps a handful of pills out on the armrest. His breaths are shallow and hurried, but he fights the urge to take the pills. We then see the seer. He uses his power to broadcast Kei and Masaru's arrival at Lady Miyako's temple to the cult. He declares Miyako's assistance as an act of war against the Cult of Akira. In the temple, Lady Miyako receives the news of Masaru's arrival. Although she's concerned when she hears that Kyoko didn't make it, Kei assures her that Chiyoko will succeed in her mission. However, when our perspective shifts to Chiyoko, we see that she's been incapacitated and lost sight of Kyoko. Luckily for her, the Colonel didn't abandon her in her fragile state. He slings her over his shoulder as she rambles about number 19 in Masaru, which excites the Colonel. He demands answers, but she's still in no shape to talk. We do, however, see that Kyoko's safe. A scientist watches over her as she sleeps in a makeshift medical unit. The last thing we see is the Colonel carrying the woman through the twilight streets before the chapter ends. Alright boys, that's chapter 18 through 20 in the books. I hope you loved the lore dump as much as I did. This added so much context, and it's the exact reason I wanted to read the manga, so I'm glad we got so much more here. Not only did I love getting a bit of history on the origins of the Akira project, but I loved Miyako's esoteric explanation of the way the powers work. I love the metaphysical elements at play here, that they are essentially tapping into a stream of energy that all life is a part of. While there are some scientific underpinnings there, it really feels more like a coalescing of the spiritual and scientific realms, more so than hard science to me. And then this next part, let me know what you think in the comments about this idea. But as I read the manga through for the second time, I couldn't help but see parallels to Stranger Things. I almost get the idea that this manga is an unsung inspiration for the Duffer Brothers. What we have here are groups of children being experimented on in secret facilities. Not only are they given numeric code names, but the experiments endow them with psychokinetic powers. We see one of the most gifted children flee the facility. An all-out manhunt ensues. There are a few other things, but also the fact that, children, they're more teenagers, they seem more grown up, but these are essentially teenagers that have been the main players in all of this, and children become really the main driving force behind a lot of this, with some help from adults, but it really is mostly children running the show here. And I think that's a big thing for Otomo, where he wanted to explore that. So it's just, again, like some parallels that really stood out to me. I'd love to know what you think.